Other questions? Yeah.
You talked about how Democrats and liberals blame this crisis to free market and capitalism.
Uh-huh.
At the same time, I mean, George Bush talked this afternoon in New York, and he blamed it on government because of, I mean, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. So.
Well, Bush has certainly changed his tune.
But well, he made a comment about how other European countries that are much more liberal, like Germany and Belgium, have followed suit the policies of the United States.
Okay, there's the question about whether it's the liberals. I mentioned liberals and Democrats were blaming the free market for this. George Bush in the speech today blamed the government for this, blamed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I guess George Bush is a late convert on this. It's too bad that Bush didn't realize this about 7 years ago and actually fight to achieve some free market policies, because there were people warning 7 years ago that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae were a disaster waiting to happen, and they've been a house of cards that have collapsed. So you know, it's sort of frustrating hearing someone who has been the source of so much of the damage, almost like George Bush wasn't there the last 7 years. Bush made almost no effort to fight for the free market in the time he's been in the White House. Bush has signed 2 farm bills that were complete disasters. Bush has signed off on the steel import tariffs and quotas. There are so many other. Bush signed off on the prescription drug Medicare thing, which is a complete disaster for the medical market. There are so many things which Bush has done to sabotage the free market, and part of the frustration is he had a lot of accomplices on Capitol Hill and in some of the think tanks, and it's going to make it a lot harder for conservatives and the GOP to have credibility when they stand up for freedom in the next 4 or 8 years. Yeah?
Do you think this is all part of an intention to sabotage sovereignty in order to move forward for the globalists versus the constitutionalists, so the globalists can push for one world government?
Okay, question is whether this is a conspiracy. Is it being done intentionally in order to advance things towards a global government? Lots of these folks are so clueless. I don't think it's part of a conspiracy, but he said there was a Washington Post columnist today, and it was at the top of on the op-ed page, and he was saying he's I think a member of the Council for Foreign Relations, and his answer is time to supersize the IMF. Now this is going to solve the problem, and there are a lot of people out there that are thinking, well, the answer is the IMF or more loans from the World Bank. I mean, World Bank is another example. You know, this is an institution that from the 1960s onwards was recognized as doing a lot of damage to the third world and bankrolling many of the worst dictators in the third world. It didn't matter how barbaric they were. The World Bank was there to give them aid and help keep them in power. You know, the World Bank is still around. It should have been abolished long ago. Instead, it keeps getting bigger. And World Bank itself is always talking about ethics reform because the bank admits it's very corrupt or has been very corrupt. And yet, people still bow to it in Washington. Outsiders don't. You know, part of the frustrating thing in the World Bank is almost all the people that take to the streets that are opposed to it are leftists. And it'd be nice to see more free market advocates out there calling for the bank to be abolished. So, anyhow. Yeah?
You were quick to point out faults in the bailout plan. How would you go about unfreezing a frozen credit market? Like, what's a good solution if you don't believe in a bailout?
Okay, the question, I was quick to criticize the bailout. What solution would I have to unfreeze the frozen credit markets? My impression is that the reason that the credit markets have been frozen is that bankers don't trust each other. And other entities don't trust each other. And government doesn't have a magic wand to make people trustworthy. If government had that kind of magic wand, Congress would be trustworthy. But Basically, basically what you're having is the government pouring in hundreds of billions of dollars as a substitute for trust and honest credit. And it's not going to work. I mean, that's why the government is having to do more threats and put more pressure on the banks and other recipients, because the banks don't, banks don't trust each other, and they sure as heck don't trust the federal government, because the federal government has changed its position so many times already on this bailout. It's very similar to what happened in 1971. The federal government imposed wage and price controls. And it happened one night when the President Nixon made a speech, and all of a sudden you had the federal government claiming it had the right to fix prices and wages across the entire economy. Well, the government set out certain general standards, but it turned out that they had to make exceptions. And pretty soon there was a tidal wave of exceptions, and it was a question of pull and fixing this and fixing that. It became completely arbitrary. And I think you're going to see the same thing with this bailout, which has transformed itself massively over the last 36 hours. So, yeah.
Any predictions? I know it's hard to do anything that way, but with the any predictions about what Obama's going to do in office and how you see, like, basically the ways that he's going to affect freedom, maybe in a positive way or in a negative way, either thing?
Questions, my predictions for an Obama presidency. Something he could do that would be a great help to freedom as soon as he takes office is open the files. Because we have little or no idea what happened over the last 8 years. Because my impression is that we've only seen the tip of the iceberg of the abuses. The torture scandal is one of the best examples. I mean, there are these rumors of videotapes, and there's a rumor of this memo, this, that, and the other. And we have seen very little of that. Those files need to be opened, not just on that, but across the board in the federal government, including going back to things like Waco. Because a huge sign that George W. Bush was going to be part of the Washington establishment was that Bush made no effort to open the files on the Clinton administration abuses. Basically, Bush helped pull the cloak on a lot of the stuff that Clinton did, especially in his final days and weeks with the pardon gate and things like that. Bush could have vigorously exposed that, called for investigations. He didn't. Another test of Obama is whether or not this country is going to have a quasi-third world standard that when someone leaves office, all of their crimes are forgiven. People that broke the law should be held liable. There should be criminal investigations if there is evidence that even the top people in the government, George Bush, Cheney, Ashcroft, and others, if there's evidence those guys broke the law, they should face charges. And that would be such a lodestar to show this is a free country. It's a thing that should have been done at the end of the Clinton administration, but it wasn't. As far as other things that he could do, people should learn what the secret guidance was in the Justice Department on the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and warrantless searches and things like that. You've had these secret opinions in the Justice Department that basically said that the king's keys open all doors, which is a phrase going back to the Middle Ages, based on the idea that there should be no limit on the president's power to intrude upon the American people. This was one of Nixon's doctrines. This is part of the reason Nixon got impeached. Unfortunately, there's been no similar effort on Bush. But as far as Obama and civil liberties, I'm not optimistic, but I think he might do some things that will be better than what we've had. As far as torture, I think he'll be better. But a major plus about Obama compared to McCain is that he's not as likely to start World War III. I mean, it was fascinating back in August when there was a flare-up between Russia and Georgia, how so much of the American media and the Washington establishment suddenly had this notion that, that if the Russian army entered Georgia, that it was the same as the Russian army, invading Canada. And it was like we had a vital interest in this borderline on the Caucasus that 99 out of 100 Americans wouldn't know where it was on a map. and most members of Congress could not find it either.